Winter in Colorado does not ask permission. It arrives like a sentence already signed, cold final, without appeal. When snow falls thick enough to erase the familiar shape of the pine forest, people learn to live by discipline, or they do not live at all. Matthias Wardell had lived long enough to know that. That night, snow began falling in the late afternoon, heavy and steady without wind. The kind of silence that tells anyone who has endured many winters that something is waiting beyond it. Matthias sat by the cast-iron stove, a cup of coffee in his hand that had gone cold without him noticing. He did not drink, he listened. No birds, no running water. The creek behind the house lay silent under ice. His cabin, long accustomed to emptiness, seemed to shrink before the cold. He set the cup down and stood just as a sound cut through the night. A scream. Not wind. Not an animal. A child's cry. Sharp and panicked, it carried through the pine forest like a thin blade. Matthias froze. His hand reached for the rifle by the door before thought caught up. He stepped to the window, wiped the frost from the glass, and looked out. In the thick white of the snow, two figures struggled forward. The adult went first, bent by the cold one arm. Locked around a child nearly spent. Behind them, low and patient, four gray shapes drifted like smoke. Wolves. The choice stood clear and brutal. Close the door. Drop the bar. Wait for morning. Strangers in winter meant trouble. Strangers with wolves at their backs meant deadly trouble. Matthias had learned that through winters without mercy. The scream came again. This time it pulled free a memory he thought he had buried with a winter 3 years past. The sound of his daughter calling out in her final fever. Thin, fragile, clinging to him, no matter how hard he had tried to forget. Matthias stood still for one more breath. Then he opened the door. Cold air surged in biting skin and bone. The woman saw him first. Her eyes met his across the white stretch of snow, no pleading, no begging. Only a hard decision. If someone had to die, it would be her before the child in her arms. Her dark brown skin stood out under the pale moonlight, her face worn by exhaustion but unbroken. Matthias raised the rifle and fired 2 shots into the air. The cracks split the night. The wolves scattered through their eyes still glimmered among the trees waiting. Inside. His voice was low, short. The woman nearly collapsed into the cabin, half dragging, half carrying the child. Matthias slammed the door shut and dropped the wooden bar. Wood struck wood with a dry sound. The small space changed at once, warmer, heavier, as if even the air had chosen to stay. They sat near the stove. The woman moved carefully despite her exhaustion, like someone used to controlling her body under all conditions. Firelight caught her high cheekbones, her strong lines. The child trembled, dark eyes fixed on Matthias, taking in every detail. Matthias poured hot water and handed them 2 tin cups. The woman wrapped both hands around hers and drew a long breath. The child followed. Steam rose, carrying the faint smell of metal and rare warmth. "How long were they following?" he asked. "More than an hour." Her voice was steady, almost unnaturally so. "The horse lost a shoe. We had to leave everything." Matthias nodded. "The storm won't break soon. You can stay until it passes." She studied him for a moment, weighing each word. "Fair." "What's your name?" Matthias asked the child. "Lena," she answered at once. "My mother is Lyanna Price." Lyanna gave a small nod. "Thank you for opening the door." "Sir Matthias," he cut in. "And I did it for the child." The corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. "At least you're honest." Outside, the wind began to howl, as if winter had just realized something had slipped through that door. Matthias turned his back to it and added wood to the stove. The flames flared, throwing 3 shadows onto the wall. 3 people bound into the same space, the door closed behind them by a decision that could not be taken back. The storm did not break overnight. It stayed as if it had decided to put down roots around the small log house on the mountainside. Wind lashed the walls, snow piled in heavy waves, burying the path and sealing every crack. Morning arrived late, and gray, the light barely strong enough to show breath drifting faintly through the room. Matthias woke before the fire burned low. He added wood, listening to the familiar crack and pop. On the narrow bed in the corner, Lyanna was already awake. She had risen early, her dark hair tied back neatly, her shoulders straight, though her coat was still damp. Lena slept on, curled close against her mother, breathing evenly, as if accustomed to sleeping in places that were not home. Matthias noticed that Lyanna asked nothing. She did not ask how long the storm would last. She did not ask how many days they could stay. She simply stood, washed her face with what warm water remained, then set about arranging the things they had used the night before. Every movement was tidy, economical, as if she meant to take up no space that did not already belong to her. He watched from a distance, pretending to busy himself with the kettle. She was calm, self-possessed, not a single plea. It made the house, long accustomed to silence, feel unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable. Matthias set a pot on the stove and poured hot water into a small basin. Lyanna looked at him. Their eyes met for a single breath, then both turned away. The avoidance came naturally, like an unspoken agreement distance would make things easier. He laid out what food remained: potatoes, hard bread, a bit of dried meat. Not much, but enough. When Lena woke, Lyanna cut the food into smaller pieces for her, rubbing the child's back as she sat up, eyes still heavy with sleep, but sharpening at once as she took in the room. Lena looked at Matthias. She did not greet him. She only gave a small nod, as if acknowledging his presence and storing it away. They ate in silence. Wind pressed against the roof, spoons touched bowls, wood burned steadily. Matthias realized it had been a long time since he had heard these sounds without feeling crowded. Instead, the house seemed to be learning how to hold more people. After the meal, Lyanna stacked the dishes and wiped the table. Matthias meant to say something, that she was a guest, that he could do it himself, but the words never left him. She was already finished, quick and unshowy. "The road's buried," Matthias said, as if to break the quiet. "At least a few days." Lyanna nodded. "We'll stay put." Not a request. Just a statement. Matthias pulled 2 thick blankets from the wooden chest and laid them on the bed. He looked at Lyanna, then at Lena. "You take the bed. I'll sleep in the chair." Lyanna shook her head at once. "That's not necessary." "It is," Matthias said. "Short. The child needs rest." Lyanna paused. She studied him long enough that he thought she might argue, but she only nodded. "One night," she said. "Then we'll see." Matthias nodded back, as if they had just signed a small agreement. The afternoon passed slowly. The storm kept them where they were. Matthias fixed a door hinge, sharpened an old knife. Lyanna sat near the stove, mending a torn seam on Lena's sleeve. The needle met cloth softly, steadily. Lena sat on the floor, gathering small pieces of wood and lining them up with care, glancing up now and then at Matthias, memorizing how he held the knife, how he placed his feet when he stood. Once Matthias reached for a cup. His hand brushed Lyanna's. Just a brief moment. Both withdrew at once, as if from a flame. No one spoke, but the room seemed to grow a little warmer. When night fell, Matthias pulled the chair closer to the stove. He added wood and checked the door bar. Lyanna led Lena to the bed and tucked the blankets around her. The child turned her head to look at Matthias one last time before sleep, her gaze serious as though keeping something important. Matthias sat down in the chair. It was hard familiar. But that night, his back did not feel as cold as it usually did. The house was no longer empty, not because there were more people in it, but because there was warmth in small things, hot water, shared food, borrowed blankets, and in silence that was shared. Outside, the storm still howled. Inside, 3 people began learning how to live together, one careful moment at a time. That morning, the storm still had not left, but the snow had changed the way it fell. No longer driving hard, it came down slow and heavy, as if weighing each flake before letting it go. Matthias woke to a warm smell spreading through the cabin, not smoke, not burning wood, but food. He opened his eyes. Lyanna was standing by the stove. She had not asked him first, had not woken him. She simply worked. Water simmered. The knife lay where it should, blade turned inward. Everything was orderly in a quiet way, as if the kitchen had known these hands for a long time. Matthias sat up and pulled the blanket off the chair. He watched. She did not hurry, did not intrude, did not take over. She measured by eye, tasted with the tip of her tongue, adjusted the fire by feel. No wasted movement, no gestures of permission. Only the steady presence of someone who knew what she was doing. Lyanna turned and met his gaze. They held still for one breath. Then she spoke, her voice even. "If you're not hungry, I'll stop." "I'm hungry," Matthias said. Short. She nodded and turned back to the pot. Firelight caught her dark brown skin, tracing her jaw and high cheekbones. Matthias noticed something that unsettled him. She was not doing these things to prove herself. She did them because this was how she stayed quietly useful, without demand. Lena woke to the smell of food. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, then slid down to the floor. "Can I help?" she asked. Lyanna handed her a cloth. "Wipe the table." Lena did it with full seriousness, wiping each edge, each corner. Matthias watched and realized it had been a long time since he had seen a morning move with this kind of rhythm. Not fast, not chaotic, just enough. They ate together. Lyanna set Lena's portion first, then Matthias's. She sat last. Matthias noticed how she cut the bread, how she nudged the plate closer to Lena, how she listened to the child chew small details but steady ones. Not a fragile woman in need of protection. A woman who knew how to keep things from falling apart. After the meal, Lyanna cleared the table. Matthias rose, meaning to stop her, but she was already done. She took the broom, swept the floor, gathered the crumbs into a neat pile. Then she opened the wooden chest only part way and straightened a few things inside. She did not ask, did not seek permission. But she did not cross any line. "You keep things this way," she said, pointing to the hooks by the wall. "But that rope there catches." Matthias followed her hand. She was right. He had grown used to disorder shaped like habit. She rearranged less, but better. He nodded. "All right." A little later, he reached for a cup. His hand brushed hers. "Just a moment." Both of them stopped. Lyanna looked up. Her gaze lingered a second longer than necessary, not searching, not challenging, only aware. Then she drew her hand back, calm, as if nothing had happened. Matthias turned away first. His heart slipped a beat. He scolded himself for noticing what did not matter. But the truth was, the house was changing. Not loudly, not suddenly. Like snow melting from within. The afternoon moved slowly. Matthias fixed the door bar. Lyanna mended Lena's clothes. The needle moved evenly. Lena sat near Matthias, watching him sharpen the knife. Why do you sharpen it so much? She asked. A dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one, Matthias said. Lyanna nodded as if storing a rule for living. I like things neat too, she said. Easier to find. Lyanna looked at her daughter, then at Matthias. A very small smile crossed her face, not because of the words, but because of the quiet alignment she had just noticed. As evening came, the light faded. Lyanna hung the blankets to dry, stacked more wood by the stove. She moved as if she already knew what the house needed. Matthias realized he no longer had to think through every small task. Someone else was thinking alongside him. When night fell, they sat near the stove. Lyanna told Matthias what she remembered fragments from the days before the storm. Matthias listened. He answered little but enough. The child laughed more. Matthias leaned back in his chair. For the first time in many years, he felt that the house held more than tools and memories. It held rhythm, human warmth, and a woman who knew how to stay not through promises, but through small acts that made a long day less cold. The afternoon moved slowly, as if the storm had made time forget how to walk. Snow outside the window fell steadily, no longer angry, only persistent. The fire in the stove had softened warm enough that no one needed to draw closer than necessary. Lyanna sat on the floor with her back against the table leg, lining up small pieces of wood into a straight row. She worked with care, her tongue sticking out slightly, as she tried to make each piece even. Matthias sharpened an old knife by the counter, the sound of wet stone against steel slow and steady. Lyanna mended a hem, the needle moving as quietly as breath. You look at my mother a lot, Lyanna said without lifting her head. The room paused. Matthias's hand stilled. Lyanna did not look up, but the needle slowed by half a beat. No, Matthias said, his voice drier than he intended. I'm looking at the stove. Lyanna nodded as if noting an incomplete fact. You look at the stove when my mother is there, she concluded. When she isn't, you look at the door. Matthias opened his mouth, then closed it. He did not know how to answer a child who was not asking to be reassured, but to confirm what she had already seen. Lyanna set the needle down. She did not look at Matthias, only at her daughter. You're talking more than usual, she said gently. Because it's quiet here, Lyanna replied. When it's quiet, I can hear more. Matthias cleared his throat and went back to the knife, slower now. What do you hear? Lyanna shrugged. Adults don't talk much when they're scared. But their hands do. Lyanna looked up. Her gaze settled on Matthias's hands, rough-crossed with old calluses tight around the knife handle. She said nothing, but her eyes stayed there a moment longer than needed. Did you have a child? Lyanna asked next, as if changing the subject. Matthias stopped completely. He set the knife down and turned his back to the fire. Yes, he said after a breath. I did. Lyanna waited. She did not press. She didn't grow up, Matthias said. Fever. 3 years ago. Lyanna drew in a very quiet breath. The needle lay still in her hand. The room held its silence, not heavy, just wide enough for the words to stand. You miss her, Lyanna said. Not a question. Matthias nodded. Every day. Lyanna placed the last piece of wood perfectly in line. She would like the stove, she said. It's warm here. Matthias let out a short laugh, breaking and fading at once. Yes, he said. She liked warm places. Lyanna looked at him then. Not with pity, not with curiosity. Only with quiet recognition, a pain named without needing explanation. Lyanna turned to her mother. You lost someone too, she said, as if stating something obvious. Lyanna touched her daughter's hair lightly. Not now, she said. Just a little, Lena insisted. I can hear it. Lyanna was silent. She looked at the stove at the fire, then at Matthias. Their eyes met. No one looked away. No one stepped closer. She spoke slowly, choosing each word. Her father is gone, Lyanna said. An accident. After that, everything became loud. Matthias did not ask. He heard the pause in her voice, the way she let the word loud stand in for other things. He nodded, as if to say he understood. We left, Lyanna went on. Because we needed quiet. Because people talked too much, Lena added. Lyanna smiled faintly. Because people wanted too much. Matthias rested his hand on the table. It stayed there, doing nothing. Here, he said, people only need enough. Lyanna looked at him. This time her gaze stayed. Enough, she repeated. Outside, the wind moved across the roof, no longer howling. The storm seemed to be listening. Lena stood and brushed off her hands. I'm done, she said, pointing to the straight row of wood. When things are straight, it's easier to breathe. Matthias looked at the row, then at Lyanna. She's smart, he said. She observes, Lyanna corrected. Because she has to. Matthias nodded. He understood that better than most. When night came, they sat near the stove. Lena told small stories, things only children remember. Matthias listened. Lyanna listened. No one rushed to fill the quiet. In the firelight, Matthias realized something had shifted. Not that the pain was gone, but that one pain had been set beside another, fitting cleanly without overlap. They saw each other now, without needing more words, and the house once again grew warmer from a simple truth: some things are seen by children long before adults are ready to name them. That morning the storm eased just enough for the silence to feel suspicious. Snow still lay deep, but the light had changed whiter, colder, as if everything were waiting for something to be spoken. Matthias stood by the window, pushing aside a thin layer of ice, looking out at the buried path. The road was still closed, but the waiting inside the house had taken a different direction. Lyanna sat at the table and opened the leather bag she had carried since the first night. She took out several sheets of paper, handling them with care, as if touching another life. Thick paper, even handwriting, a red seal worn at one corner. Matthias did not try to look yet. His eyes went to the details: the paper, the folds, the seal, things that did not belong to someone fleeing through a storm. Do you have a pencil? Lyanna asked. Matthias handed one over. She wrote a few quick lines, folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope. Neat, certain movements, not the habits of someone used to lack. He realized it did not come as a discovery, but as a piece quietly settling into place. The well-made seams of her coat, the leather boots carefully kept, the way she judged the fire ran the kitchen, the way she never asked permission, not out of pride but out of familiarity with deciding. Lyanna stood and returned the papers to her bag. I'll need to send this when the road opens, she said, just to keep things from drifting too far. Matthias nodded. What things? She looked at him. This time she did not look away. Land. Livestock. Workers. She paused. Not here. The air in the room tightened. Matthias felt something in his chest slip off rhythm. He braced a hand on the counter, giving his body something solid. You have a lot. Lyanna let out a slow breath. Enough for others to want it. He did not ask more. But the answer opened an invisible distance, measured not in steps, but in the way he looked at his own boots, felt the calluses on his hands. A man with a log house and a road buried by snow. A woman with land and names spoken elsewhere. Lunch passed more quietly. Lyanna cooked as usual. Lena sat near the stove watching the adults shift without fully understanding why. Matthias ate less. He found himself weighing each movement, each word, as if afraid of breaking something newly exposed. "You're not hungry," Lena said. Not a question. "I am," Matthias answered. "Just slow." Lena tilted her head. "You think a lot when people say big words." Lyanna looked up. "Big words like land a lot somewhere else," Lena said. "Those words make people quiet." Lyanna pressed her lips together lightly. Matthias looked at the child, then away. He felt seen not for being poor, but for an old fear rising up again, the fear of not being enough. The fear of standing beside a different kind of life with nowhere to place his feet. In the afternoon, Matthias went outside to check the fence. The cold bit at his face. The work helped him avoid the questions crowding in. When he returned, the house was neater. Lyanna had rearranged the wood rack, sorted the ropes, set the tools in order. Everything worked better, and that somehow unsettled him. Not because it had been changed, but because it showed she was used to managing systems larger than this house. "You don't have to do that," Matthias said. His voice dry. "No," Lyanna replied calmly. "I do." He looked at her. "You do. I need to know how the place I'm in works," she said. "So I don't get in the way." There was no apology in her tone. It sharpened the invisible distance. Matthias stepped back not with his feet, but with a decision to stay quiet. When night came, they sat near the stove without touching. Firelight threw separate shadows on the wall. Lena played with pieces of wood, then suddenly said, "Mom has a lot of things somewhere else. You have few things here." Matthias froze. Lyanna placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Lena, I'm just saying what's true," the child said. "But Mom chose to be here." The words fell into the room, neither heavy nor light, exactly where it hurt. Matthias looked at Lyanna. She met his gaze unguarded. "I haven't chosen," she said. "I'm just here." He nodded. "Being here is enough," he said, though it sounded like reassurance meant for himself. Night settled. Matthias lay on the chair, eyes open in the dark. The invisible distance lay between them, needing no measure. It was woven from unspoken things, money power, the fear of being seen as lacking. He heard Lyanna turn in her sleep, heard Lena's steady breathing. Before drifting into a thin, restless sleep, Matthias realized something more frightening than the storm. It was not that she was too large for his life, but that he was shrinking himself. And that truth stayed waiting for the next night, the night when everything would be forced to shift. That night, the storm did not return. No wind tearing at the roof, no snow striking the windows. The log house stood still in the mountains, as if for the first time in days it was allowed to breathe. The quiet came slowly, cautiously, like someone once turned away who now dared to knock softly. Matthias added a small piece of wood to the stove. The fire caught, slowly, did not flare. The light was gentle, just enough to see each other's faces without laying them bare. Lena had gone to sleep early, curled under the blankets, breathing evenly. The room held only the two adults now, and everything they had avoided saying all day. Lyanna sat on the low chair near the stove. She was not mending, not arranging, not doing anything to fill the space. She simply sat. Matthias realized this was the first time she had allowed herself not to be busy. "It's quiet tonight," he said, as if needing to confirm it. "Yes," Lyanna answered. "Rare." They were silent. Not a strained silence, but one with shape wide enough to set fear down without breaking it. "You think I'll leave?" Lyanna said first, her voice low. not a question. Matthias watched the fire. I think, when the road opens. What are you afraid of? She asked very softly. The question stayed in the room. Matthias drew in a slow breath. That I'm not enough, he said. Not enough for someone who has a whole life somewhere else. Not enough to keep. Lyanna nodded as if she had known. I'm afraid of being kept, she said. Of staying because I'm forced to, because I need to hide, because there's nowhere else. They looked at each other. Two fears not facing off, but standing side by side, fitting together in a strange way. Here Matthias said, I don't keep anyone. I know, Lyanna replied. Because you opened the door without asking who I was. She stood and took one step closer. The distance between them shortened, unhurried. Matthias did not step back. He let his hands fall open at his sides. No waiting, no demand. Lyanna stopped. Then she did something very small, very clear. She took his hand. Her hand was warm, steady, not trembling, not testing. It rested there like a considered decision. Matthias felt his heartbeat change course. He did not close his hand right away. He stayed still, making sure he was allowed. Lyanna sat beside him. She rested her head against his shoulder. In that moment, the house seemed to widen wide enough for two people to breathe in the same rhythm. Matthias lifted his hand slowly and placed it lightly on her arm. No pulling, no holding. Just touch. Tonight, Lyanna said, her voice close to his ear. I choose to stay. Not a promise. Not a long-term vow. Just the choice of a night without a storm, and it was strong enough to change everything. They sat that way for a long time. The fire burned down to embers. Outside, the forest was silent. Matthias realized he did not need to say anything more. Intimacy did not come from explanation, but from staying still in the same quiet. When Lyanna lifted her head, her eyes did not turn away. Matthias saw permission there, quiet, unforced. He leaned in and touched his forehead to hers first, asking with the gesture. She nodded very slightly. The kiss came slowly. No rush, no claim. Only the confirmation that they were in the right place at the right moment. Matthias felt her breath, the scent of fire of wood, the warmth of a night without a storm. He placed his hand on her back and kept it there, close enough to know, far enough to respect. Lyanna set her hand against his chest, where his heartbeat was saying more than words. She leaned closer. There was nothing to prove. No one had to be stronger. When they stood, neither hurried. Matthias put out the stove and checked the door, old habit, then stopped. He turned to look at Lyanna. She stood there calm as if she had belonged to this place for a long time. They went into the inner room in silence. The door closed not to hide but to keep warmth in. Outside, the night lay quiet like consent. And in the log house in the mountains, two people crossed an invisible line, not through storm or force, but through trust, freely given light enough not to frighten either of them. Morning opened with a different kind of light. Not the dull white of the storm, not the tired gray of waiting. The sun was thin and sharp, cutting across the snow that had begun to crack along the edges of the path. The log house stood quiet, but no longer innocent. Matthias felt it the moment he stepped onto the porch. Hoof prints in the snow. Not old. Not his. The marks were clean and even, leading straight down from the slope, made by someone who knew exactly where he was going. Matthias stood still for a breath, letting his eyes learn the shape. A good horse. New shoes. A rider without hesitation. He turned back inside. Lyanna stood by the table, a cup of water in her hand, watching him. One look was enough. Someone's here, Matthias said. Lyanna set the cup down. Her hand tightened slightly, then released. How long just arrived? They said nothing more. Lena sat reading in the corner, head bent low. Matthias went to the door and opened it before the man outside could knock. Not rushed. Not defiant. Just refusing to let anyone else set the rhythm of this house. The man on the porch was tall, wearing a new coat with straight seams boots still carrying the shine of care. His face was calm in the way of men accustomed to being heard. His eyes were cool, calculating. I'm looking for Lyanna Price, he said, his voice smooth, polite. She's not receiving visitors, Matthias replied. The man smiled thinly. I'm family. Lyanna stood behind Matthias now. She did not step forward, but her presence was unmistakable. When the man saw her, his expression shifted, not surprise but confirmation. Lyanna, he said, we need to talk. No, Lyanna answered. One word. In that moment, Matthias felt the change in her not shaking, but fear held tightly in place. He stepped half a pace forward, his shoulder instinctively blocking her from view. You've heard her, Matthias said. Leave. The man's gaze dropped briefly to the rifle resting near the door, then returned to Matthias. Who are you? The one who opens the door, Matthias said, and the one who closes it. The man exhaled, patient. Lyanna has obligations. Property needs proper oversight. There are documents to sign. Lyanna stepped forward, her voice steady but low. My property. I said no, you can't hide forever, the man said. Some things belong to family. Family doesn't come to collect, Lyanna replied. Matthias felt anger rise quiet and solid. You heard her. Go. The man tilted his head, assessing. You think you can stop me? Matthias lifted the rifle slightly, not aiming just enough to draw a clear line. I think you should turn around while you still can. The air froze. Lena stood behind them, unusually still. Lyanna reached out and touched Matthias's back, no pulling, no restraint, only a reminder that she was there. The gesture was small, but it held him steady. The man looked at Lyanna one last time. You'll come back, he said with certainty. You can't walk away from what you have. Lyanna met his gaze. I'm not walking away. I'm choosing. He gave a faint, humorless smile and turned, stepping off the porch. The horse shifted hooves, striking the snow. When the man disappeared behind the line of pines, Matthias finally lowered the rifle. He shut the door and dropped the bar. Inside, silence fell like a heavy blanket. Lyanna stood still, then began to tremble clearly for the first time. Matthias turned and placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, he said. At least for today. She nodded, but her breathing had not yet settled. He'll come back. Maybe, Matthias said, but not alone. Lena came closer and took her mother's hand. He stood in front, the child said, as if recording a new truth. He wasn't afraid. Matthias looked at her. I was afraid, he said. But I stood. Lyanna looked at him, her eyes deep, holding gratitude, and something else, a trust, just placed where it belonged. She squeezed his hand briefly, then let go. The space between them had changed. No longer the caution of strangers sheltering from a storm, but the bond of people who had chosen to face what came together. Outside, the snow kept melting, but danger had changed its shape. It was no longer wind and cold. It was people. And Matthias Wardell understood that from this moment on, the door he had opened on a night of snow carried a new responsibility to stand in between when it mattered. After the stranger disappeared behind the line of pines, the house did not return to what it had been. This quiet was not gentle. It was taut, like a rope pulled too far. Matthias stood near the door for a long while, listening not for wind, but for the chance of footsteps returning. Only when he was sure there was nothing but the forest breathing did he turn back inside. Lyanna sat on the low chair, both hands resting on her knees. Her shoulders were straight, but her eyes never left the door bar. Lena leaned close against her mother, unusually silent. "He won't stop," Lyanna said. Not shaking, but not hidden either. "He isn't used to hearing the word no." Matthias nodded. "Then we stop saying no." Lyanna looked up. "What do you mean we say enough?" he replied. "Enough to stand here. Enough to owe no explanations." He pulled on his coat and hung the rifle where it always rested, not hidden, not displayed. Then he did something very ordinary, added wood to the stove, checked the bar, set the sharpened knife back in its place. Familiar movements unhurried, as if he were arranging the house into a new order, an order of readiness. Lyanna watched him, not with loud admiration, just with the recognition of how a man chooses where to stand when answers begin to be demanded. "You don't have to do this," she said. "This is my matter." Matthias turned and met her eyes. "Here is my matter." She was about to speak, then stopped. "You know I chose to stay," she said, as if testing the ground beneath her. "I know," he answered. "And because it's your choice, I stand." There were no vows, no long promises. Only position him standing in front, not blocking her, not leaving. The afternoon passed in small tasks. Matthias walked the perimeter, checking the fence marking places to repair once the snow broke. Lyanna stayed inside preparing food, but from time to time she stepped onto the porch, looking toward the road. Each time Matthias lifted his head, not questioning, not soothing, simply present. Protection without display, without words. "Have you done this before?" Lyanna asked when he came back in brushing snow from his coat. "Stand in front," Matthias considered. "No. I used to step aside." She did not ask more, but her eyes softened, understanding that this choice did not come from instinct, but from decision. At supper, Lena pulled her chair closer to Matthias. "If he comes back," the child said calmly, "you'll still stand in front, right?" Matthias set his bowl down and looked at her. "I will," he said. "But you stand behind your mother. Everyone stands where they belong." Lena nodded, satisfied. Lyanna watched the exchange, her chest tightening in a good way, not because she was being shielded, but because she was being respected. When night came, Matthias checked the door only once, thoroughly. Then he sat beside Lyanna. The space between them was closer than on previous nights, but unhurried. She placed her hand over his naturally, not asking for reassurance, just confirming. "You didn't ask what I would sign, what I would give up," she said softly. "Not my business," he replied. "My business is that you choose." Lyanna drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly. "I used to live where everything had a price," she said. "Every decision was counted. Here I'm left alone." Matthias nodded. "Here people leave each other alone." They sat that way, listening to the fire. There was no kiss. None was needed. What bound them now was certainty that if danger returned, it would meet a man who did not step back. The night deepened. Lena slept. Lyanna stood and turned back to Matthias. "If he comes again tomorrow," she said, "I'll say no again." "And I'll stand," he answered. She smiled, not impulsive, not romantic. The smile of someone who had placed trust in the right place. She leaned in and rested her forehead briefly against his shoulder. Matthias set his hand on her back and held without tightening. In that moment, the feeling changed shape. No longer the closeness of people sheltering from a storm. It was the quiet commitment of two people who had chosen to stand together when it mattered. Outside, the forest lay still. Inside, Matthias Wardell did not step back. And Lyanna Price knew this was a man to trust, not because he was strong, but because he stood where he should when it counted. The snow did not melt loudly. It withdrew inch by inch, revealing dark earth and thin streams of water running along the path. That morning, the sun was strong enough to make the last bits of ice on the porch glint. Matthias opened the door and took a long breath. The road in front of the house had appeared not fully clear, but passable. Lyanna stood behind him, coat on Lyanna close at her side. The three of them looked down the slope leading into the valley. That road had once been an escape. Now it was a choice. "The road's open," Matthias said. Lyanna nodded. She was not relieved, not saddened, just calm, like someone who had known this day would come and had waited for it with enough patience. Lena bent down, picked up a shard of ice, squeezed it once, then let it fall. It melted, she said, as if confirming something obvious. Inside, Lyanna opened her bag of documents. This time she did not avoid them. She spread them across the table: land deeds, confirmations, faded seals, pieces of a former life that had carried power and danger in equal measure. "I could leave," she said, not looking at anyone. "Go back there. Prove everything is legal. Set the boundaries again." Matthias rested his hand on the table. "You don't have to do anything because of me." "I know," Lyanna said. "That's why I'm saying it." She looked at Lena. The child stood straight, listening like someone used to hearing big decisions spoken in an ordinary voice. "What do you think?" Lyanna asked. "I think we should finish it," Lena said, "so they don't come back again." Matthias looked at the child, then at Lyanna. "I'll go with you," he said. "Not an offer, not a condition, just position." Lyanna looked up. Her eyes held him, measuring not courage but intent. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Matthias said. "Not to protect, to stand beside you." They planned it through the thawing morning. No raised voices, no arguments. Lyanna would return, confirm the legitimacy of the property, shut down what remained of the disputes. She would sell a portion of the land, not out of lack, but because there was enough to remove the incentive for others to cling. The rest would go to a trusted manager, keeping things steady and distant from places that demanded her presence. "And your ranch?" Lyanna asked. Matthias looked toward the window where the old fence was emerging from the melting snow. "It needs work," he said. "Good land, but short on hands and time." Lyanna nodded as if she had already walked this far. "I want to invest," she said. "Not to rescue, not to buy, to work together." Matthias was silent for a beat. Then he nodded. Together. By midday, they prepared. Lyanna arranged the papers in order. Matthias checked the wagon-tightened straps, chose the least muddy route. Lena folded the blankets carefully, like someone who understood that small tasks help big decisions stand firm. Before leaving, Lyanna paused at the doorway. She set her hand on the wooden frame, old scratches, fresh repairs. "I choose this," she said without waiting to be asked. "Not out of fear, not to run, because I want to." Matthias stood beside her. "And I choose to go with you." The road opened ahead. The wagon rolled slowly through meltwater wheels, crunching over thin ice. The forest slipped behind them. Lyanna looked back once at the log house, the place that had given her one night without a storm, then several days without needing to prove anything. She did not turn again. The journey was not long, but long enough for everything to be said. Back in her former world, Lyanna worked efficiently. Papers were confirmed. Boundaries were reset. The eyes that once demanded now had to accept. Matthias stood beside her, speaking little, but his presence kept every word from slipping. When it was finished, Lyanna signed the sale of part of the land, enough to sever the hands that wanted to pull her back. The rest she placed under management, keeping income flowing and distance intact. There were no tears, no regret. They returned to Matthias's ranch. The sun stood higher now. The land opened wide, damp with new scent. Lyanna stepped down from the wagon and looked at the empty space waiting to be built again. "We start here," she said. Matthias smiled just slightly. "Here." Lyanna ran ahead a few steps, then turned back and took both their hands. "New home," she declared. No one corrected her. The snow had melted, and the choice had been made freely, calmly, and at the right time. They did not marry right away. There was no proposal at sunset, no ring laid on the table, no date circled. Life began another way, quieter, sturdier, through mornings waking together and evenings ending in shared tiredness. Matthias's ranch changed slowly without announcement. Lyanna did not arrive with grand plans. She began by watching where the land held water, which fence took the wind hardest, how winter loosened its grip. Matthias worked as he always had, except now there was someone beside him asking the right questions, offering choices at the right moment. They worked together, no one above, no one behind. In the mornings, Matthias went to the barn early. Lyanna brewed coffee, checked her ledger, calculated what was needed. Lena woke later, hair-tangled eyes still heavy with sleep. She no longer asked where they were going. She had learned what it meant to stay. "Can you give this to—" Matthias, Lena said one morning, setting bread on the table. The name landed naturally without testing. Matthias looked up at Lyanna. She did not correct it. She only smiled very slightly. In the days that followed, Lena began calling him Matt. No permission asked, no explanation given. Matthias heard it, felt his heart miss a beat, then kept working. The new name did not change him, but it softened everything around him. The house shifted with their rhythm. Matthias added another window, letting more light in. Lyanna hung simple curtains, placed books on a shelf, laid a small rug by the stove. Not for decoration, for use. Everything had a place, and every place had a reason. In the evenings, they ate together. There was no need for many words. Lena talked about the small local school, about the new horse, about rain coming. Matthias listened. Lyanna listened. No one competed for space. Some nights they sat on the porch watching the sky change color. Lyanna leaned into Matthias's shoulder. He rested his hand on her back and left it there. Nothing to prove. Intimacy had taken on a different shape, not the passing of a storm, but the steady rhythm of one day following another. Once Lyanna said, "We don't need to name this." Matthias nodded. "We just need to do it." And they did. Lyanna put her money where it mattered, buying better seed, hiring 2 seasonal hands. Matthias taught her how to read the soil by touch, how to listen to the wind. They argued a few times, but never loudly. When they disagreed, they stopped, worked on something else, then came back. Every decision was set on the table, nothing hidden. Lena began hanging her drawings on the wall. She drew the house, the barn, 3 figures standing side by side. No explanation needed. Matthias pinned the drawing by the kitchen door where everyone could see it. Lyanna said nothing, but that night she kept her hand on his a little longer. The house did not grow all at once. It learned how to hold more people, more laughter, more silence in the right places. Matthias realized he no longer counted evenings alone. He no longer thought about the empty space. The space had been filled by staying. One afternoon, Lena came running back, mud all over her pant legs. "Matt," she called, loud and proud. I helped. Matthias laughed. "Good. Wash your hands first. Lyanna watched them, her chest settling in a way it hadn't for a long time. Not because everything was perfect, but because no one was being sent away. Because no one had to prove they deserved to be there. That night, Lyanna lay beside Matthias, listening to his familiar breathing. "Do you find it strange," she asked softly, "that we haven't said the word family?" Matthias turned toward her in the dark. "Family doesn't need to be said," he answered. "It happens." She smiled and closed her eyes. Outside, the wind moved across the grass. The house stood steady. A family had formed not through a single important day, but through choosing to stay every day, and none of them wanted to be anywhere else. Time moved in its own way, not loudly, without asking permission. It did not announce itself through great milestones, but through very small changes, a strand of gray appearing at Matthias's temples, a fine line at the corner of Lyanna's eyes. When she smiled, Lena's height rising faster than the marks Matthias carved into the doorpost. The ranch grew, but never in a hurry. In the early years, they worked more than they spoke. The land was divided with care, the barns expanded, an extra storehouse built. Lyanna brought long-range calculation. Matthias kept the practical rhythm of soil and season. The two ways of seeing did not collide, they completed each other. People in the area began to come. At first, a few seasonal hands, then families who needed a place to stay, steady work. Matthias never put up a hiring notice. Lyanna never sent invitations. News traveled in its own way through those who stayed. Wardell Ranch became a place where people could work without being pressed. Wages were clear. Lodging was decent. There was a hot meal at the end of the day. Those small things wove a community unnamed but present. Lena grew up inside that rhythm. She no longer watched the world with the guarded eyes she had carried at the beginning. She laughed more, spoke more, yet kept the habit of looking people straight in the eye, shy. Saw spoke. One ordinary morning she called Matthias Dad. No ceremony, no waiting for a reaction. Matthias heard it, paused for a single beat, then went back to tightening a bridle. That evening he repaired the porch post longer than necessary. Lyanna said nothing. She simply set a hand on his shoulder as she passed. Enough. Other children came later, their two together. One boy, one girl. There were no grand stories around their births. Only careful preparation, hands ready to help, and a house that had learned how to hold more crying. Matthias stayed up more nights. Lyanna was more tired but not spent. They had learned how to lean on each other. The house changed again. Another room added a brighter kitchen, a longer porch. Nothing extra. Everything was used. Children's drawings covered one wall. Boots piled untidily by the door. Life showed itself in ways that could not be neatly arranged, and they did not try. The community around them thickened with the years. People came and stayed. Others left and returned. Children grew, learned to work, learned to respect the land. When someone fell on hard times, they came to the ranch, not to beg, but to work. Lyanna kept the books clean and open. Matthias kept the work steady and fair. Neither stood above, neither stood apart. Some afternoons, Lyanna sat on the porch, watching the cattle come in. Matthias stood beside her, hands resting on the rail. In the yard, children ran back and forth, laughter breaking in the sun. Lena, now a young woman, sat reading, lifting her eyes now and then to smile when she caught Matthias's glance. No words needed. They understood each other. "Did you ever think it would turn out like this?" Lyanna asked once. Matthias shook his head. "I only thought about the next day." She smiled. That was enough. The ranch prospered, but it did not consume them. It gave them work without taking their lives. Hands stayed on for years, treating the place as home. Shared meals happened without being holidays. Community grew out of the habit of sharing one more blanket, one more bowl of soup, one more place at the table. Many years later, standing on the porch, on a quiet evening, Matthias realized the emptiness that had once clung to him was gone. He looked at Lyanna, the woman who had chosen to stay, and felt full in a very quiet way. Not because he had everything, because there was enough. Time kept moving. The ranch stood firm. The family grew. And within those ordinary days, they lived in gratitude not for miracles, but for small choices made well repeated over many years. Age came to Matthias and Lyanna in a way people rarely talk about. Not through sudden illness, not through a single event that forced them to stop. It came slowly, like morning frost, visible enough to notice, never sharp enough to fear. Matthias walked more slowly now. In the mornings he lingered on the front step, watching sunlight spill across the valley. Lyanna wore an extra light coat, tied her scarf, before stepping onto the porch. They did not talk about getting older. They adjusted their pace. That was enough. The ranch still woke every day. It no longer needed them at the front of everything. Lena, now grown, managed most of the work, as steady and capable as Lyanna once had been. The younger children followed, each taking on what fit them best. The hands from the area stayed on for years, used to how this place worked. Honest labor, fair pay, no one pushed out when times grew hard. The log house was no longer the home of a solitary man. It had learned how to open itself beyond rooms and walls through the habit of welcoming. In some winters, people knocked late at night. In some summers, they arrived worn thin by the road. The door opened without many questions, only enough to help. Matthias sat by the stove more often now. He liked the sound of the fire, liked watching new faces warm as the cold left them. Lyanna set out another kettle, another blanket. Small gestures repeated over years became the house's shared language. One quiet evening they sat together on the porch. The wind was light. The smell of young grass drifted up from the fields. Matthias laid his hand over Lyanna's, the same hand that had taken his on the night without a storm, still warm in the familiar way. "Do you remember that night?" he asked. Lyanna nodded. "The night I stepped through the door." "The night I opened it," Matthias corrected. She smiled. "That door didn't open just for me." Matthias looked toward the old road, now a well-worn path. "I thought I saved a mother and her child," he said quietly. "But really, I saved myself." Lyanna leaned her head against his shoulder. She did not argue. There was no need. Children in the area learned to call this place home when they needed to. Older folks knew that as long as there was a road to walk and a door to open, they would not be alone. The house had no sign, no name. It was known by how people stayed and how they came back. Time kept moving like the creek behind the house, changing shape, never direction. Matthias grew weaker, but his eyes stayed clear when they rested on Lyanna. When he needed a steadying hand, she was there. When she grew tired, he slowed with her. They aged together, leaving no one behind. One spring morning, Matthias sat on the front step longer than usual. The sun rose early. Lyanna brought him coffee and placed it in his hands. They did not speak. Inside the house, soft footsteps, someone arriving early, needing help. Lyanna stood and opened the door. It opened as it always had. Matthias watched, his heart at ease. He understood then that a legacy was not land, nor what had been built. It was the habit of opening the door again and again at the right moment without display. As dusk fell, the house glowed with lamplight, low voices, gentle laughter. Lyanna returned to sit beside him. Matthias squeezed her hand lightly, a thank you that needed no words. If anyone were to ask what made that life what it was, Matthias would not speak of storms or wolves or men who came to claim what was not theirs. He would speak of a single brief moment, the choice to open a door, and of all the days that followed day after day when that door did not close. Night settled in, wind passed over the grass, the house stood quiet and strong. Those inside slept in peace. And in this place, as it had been for many years, anyone in need knew one knock was enough. If as you listened you were reminded of someone who once sat beside you on a porch, who held your hand through a long winter, please share that memory in the comments. Those stories matter, and they can warm other hearts as well. If this story left you with a sense of warmth, please press like to support the channel. And if you'd like to keep walking with us through stories like this, subscribe so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for listening and for staying all the way to the final moment.